to our proposed Wairarapa Combined District Plan, hearing stream 10, day 1 of 1 on the Monday, the 7th of April. If we would like to open today's meeting, please, if everyone stands for the karakia timitanga. Mai te paeronga, raro ki te tai, mai iti angotonga, raro ki te awaraki, tene te hapori, awhia e taratahi, whano, whano, haere mai te toki, homie, hui, tai e. My name is Robin Cherry Campbell. I'm the chair for today's hearing stream 10. The topics that we are covering, the chapters we're covering today are noise, activities on the surface of water, light, signs and free activities. And these are all district-wide matters. If I could get the rest of the panel to introduce themselves, starting to my right.
Hello everybody, Brian Della, Carlton District Councillor, Commissioner.
Kia ora, Joe Hayes, tōku ingoa. I'm the Rangitane Iwi Rep, Commissioner.
Good morning, everybody. David McMahon, Commissioner, based in Wellington.
Alistair Plummer from South Harbour District Council. And Bio Marston District Council.
Katie Hooser, the reporting officer for the noise topic.
Steve Arden, expert on noise.
I'm the consultant planner at Botham School and here today to capture questions and any backgrounds that the panel may need on.
Thank you. And
morning everybody, Solitaire Robertson, Planning and Regulatory Manager, Carlton District Council.
Kia ora, Becca Evans, reporting officer for light and activities for students. Kia ora, Alice Bone, a planner at Marston District Council.
Matthew, I'm planner at South Wairarapa District Council and I'm the reporting officer for temporary activities.
I'm Chris Gorman, lead planner at South Wairarapa District Council, reporting on the signs.
Secure Insurance Administrator.
yeah. Welcome everyone today. So we will start this morning's proceedings on the noise topic. And I will hand over to Katie.
Start, I just want to check how you would want South and Mr. Arden to go through the statements. I was thinking I could go through mine and each submitter, Arden can respond with his part rather than.
That would be great because then we can keep the continuity. Yes, thank you.
My name is Katie Hooser, Ni Treadway, Senior Planner at Botham School, acting on behalf of 3 Waipara District Councils. I've been involved in the review since 2023 and drafted the provisions utilities chapter. I prepared the Section 42A report for the matters running activities and my qualifications and experience set out in that report. So on the operative district plan, the operative district plan contains provisions that allow for a range of noise generating activities subject to standards to limit the duration, time and level of noise emitted to mitigate potential adverse effects. A general objective relating to amenity values and 2 specific policies for noise are contained in Chapter 19. District-wide noise rules are contained in Chapter 21 and specific rules are contained in the individual zone chapters.
Can I, sorry, through you, Chair,
Yes.
can I just ask some questions about the operative plan, please? So the operative plan didn't have a single chapter dealing with it. It was spread over different.
It was spread over the different chapters and then also the zone chapter.
Yes. Okay. And how would you describe the approach of the operative plan in terms of the control of noise and effects?
There was, I guess, some zones didn't have any controls,
Okay.
And there was some particular activities that weren't controlled altogether.
Weren't controlled. Yeah. Okay.
I was having not been involved in the whole of the noise chapter, I would potentially have to go back and look at that
If you were comparing,
and compare.
if you were comparing what you know about the proposed plan and the operative plan, would you say that the proposed plan is, the operative plan was more liberal, or?
Yes, I think so.
And presumably the operative plan didn't contain any anything similar to the overlays that are
No,
that exist.
there was no what is the Kiwi Rail, the rail one that they're seeking. That's not in the operative plan, and there was nothing in terms of state highway noise.
Yes, and some of the other overlays that exist that are proposed. Sorry.
As in like by the vibration.
Yes. What about things like bird scaring devices, frost protection devices, wind turbine adders, helicopter? Was there any controls on those things in there?
Yes.
On all of those matters?
We have to double check the frost.
Yes.
I know that is pretty sure that is on others.
Yeah.
I'd like to come and confirm.
Probably know where this is leading. It's just a simple table of those activities and overlays. Got operative plan, yes. Post plan, obviously, yeah. And maybe just a column on the commentary where you need to explain a provision in the operative plan or proposed plan, just for clarification. That would be useful for the panel just to understand in their deliberations. Okay. And okay, I'll have some questions for Mr. Ardern later in terms of standards, but I'll deal with those later on. But Mr. Ardern, that's just basically, if you could just update us on the any changes to NZD standards that have occurred between the operative plan and the proposed plan.
Yeah.
At your time.
Now?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you happy for me to continue?
Yeah, I am. You're gonna now move on to the
review.
Yeah.
Paragraph 4. So the review of the operative district plan identified issues. So the issue 1 was referenced out of date standards, and some activities and zones have no noise limits. So some of the rules refer to New Zealand standards that have either been superseded or out of date descriptors. There are no limits to noise received in either the commercial industrial zones. Noise limits in these 2 zones only apply to noise emissions when received in residential zones. The lack of noise limits within the zone may only have limited adverse effects at this time, but should residential units be desired in these zones, then there's the impact on the amenity of those dwellings, and there are no restrictions from frost protection. This has potential to limit adverse effects on new residential units or existing residential units as new frost protection devices installed. And issue 2, noise generating activities and the potential for sensitivity conflicts. So the operative district plan discourages noise sensitive activities locating near new noise generating activities, potentially resulting in reverse sensitivity conflicts that may impact on the ability of such activities to operate or increase capacity. The operative district plan manages this issue in relation to Hood Aerodrome and Chester Road helicopter operations. However, it doesn't manage this issue near state highways within this series.
Just before you
Yes.
just before you get into the proposed plan, in this under issue 2, you say the operative plan manages this issue. That's the issue of reverse sensitivity. Do you mean it only manages the issue in relation to Hood and Chester Road? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So the proposed district plan, key changes from the operative plan would update noise standards and measurements, update noise level zones, zone interfaces, include additional noise installation requirements, management for construction, wind farm, aircraft, and helicopter noise, and limit noise from bird scaring, frost protection devices, and temporary activities and events. So the proposed provisions contained within the noise chapter in part 2 just to provide amenity matters and include a definition for noise sensitive activities. 2 objectives. Would you like me to read each of them?
That's fine.
So 8 policies and a rule framework which provides for permitted activities, and then space standard. So a total of 32 original submissions, 120 submission points, and 8 further submissions, 34 submission points through the noise topic. Submissions are generally in support or sought for the application. So on to the precept-related evidence. I'll take as read. So we'll go on to New Zealand Agriculture Aviation Association.
Just before you do, I would certainly appreciate a little bit of an explanation of how the noise chapter works. I don't know that I understand it completely. And I think we've got the time to do that.
We definitely do.
So maybe if you just take us through the objectives and policy framework and just a few headline points there about the approach, and then the rules and standards would be for each of the new activities and overlays would be useful.
So there are 2 objectives for noise, and they look out. That obviously noise generating activities can generate adverse effects. And one of the main things is obviously public health and safety and wellbeing. And then there's also an objective related to sensitivity. And then there are a number of policies talking about, I guess, enabling noise in areas where it is appropriate. And also ensuring that those noise effects are compatible. And then there are specific policies relating to construction, noise near, providing noise insulation near state highways, noise and like the protection of hood aerodrome, and then also noise sensitive activities in the commercial mixed use zones. And then there are 2 additional objectives about some activities may have limited duration or frequency, and then also noise in the rural environment. And so in terms of the rules at the front.
Sorry, just after. I was just going to ask you about objective 02, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Obviously, these are 01 and 02 are sort of companion objectives. 02's. Well, how would you describe 02? What's the goal? What's the outcome? 02, 01, sorry.
01.
Yes.
So it's about, I guess, that there are recognising that there are some activities that generate noise, and I guess making sure that they occur in the appropriate location and don't generate those adverse effects.
Okay. And 02 focuses clearly on reverse sensitivity, particularly on permitted or existing activities that making sure that they're not compromised. Where that activity is protected by way of a designation, such as the highway or the rail corridor or presumably Hood Airport, sorry. What would be, I mean, presumably these operators don't want any curfews or restrictions on their operation, and that's understandable. But what techniques or tools does the council have to actually, aside from putting in an overlay, aside from that, what sort of techniques could council use to constrain or those sort of noise generating activities, given that they're protected by designation. I mean, my understanding is that the designation suppresses the roles.
Yeah.
And that the activity, so long as it's an activity that's covered by the purpose of the designation, and carry out as of right, unless there are any conditions on the designation.
Yeah, so those activities aren't limited. I guess it's new activities coming in, which is why the objective is there, is that those new activities shouldn't prevent the existing activity from operating.
Yeah, and I understand that, but how would those new activities prevent those existing activities, such as the railway line or the state highway, from actually operating, given that they are covered by a designation? Is there any mechanism in the RMA that would?
I think I need to come back to you on that, yeah.
The only one I can think of is section 16, which is a duty on all operators, regardless of whether they're permitted to. It's about undue noise. Hearing. So, okay. I'm just trying to understand the nature of the problem and what the appropriate remedy is. Whether it's to rely on just for those infrastructure operations that are protected by a designation, just to rely on that, or to bring in noise controls via an overlay, or both. That's, I mean, I know you didn't do the section 32 assessment, but you've obviously looked at it. And does it canvass those different options in terms of introducing overlays? Does it recognise that Wood Aerodrome and the railway line and the state highway are protected by way of designation?
I'd have to go back and
fully
for that issue, yeah.
Okay. I completely understand that it's not just about protecting. There's two elements, two sides of the coin with reverse sensitivity. There's the continued operation of the polluter, if you like, to want to use a better term, but also the health and safety and amenity of the receptor. So I completely understand the receptor component. It's really what the risk is to the polluter of being constrained, whether have a protection such as a designation in place. So I think the panel needs a little bit more on that. We'll write a reply.
Yeah, Katie, could you just take us through the sensitivities of obviously and I know it says here that existing and permitted. I just want to get your view on as our urban expands more into the rural environment, the protection of existing businesses and so on. You telling me that this will protect those businesses from people who then order on next to a cow shed or something or other, saying, okay, well, that's now noisy, because we've seen it over many years. People will go, oh, I've moved into the district. I didn't realise the tractor started at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it's an objective to protect those existing.
So this is an absolute protection to the rural community, that they won't be affected by people who go, boy, I came to the rural environment for quiet, and all of a sudden I've got tractors and harvesters and helicopters.
I don't think anything is absolute, but it's certainly an objective to prevent those things from happening. In terms of those rural noises that you're talking about, the rural exceptions also exclude those kind of noises from the rules, so they're already permitted in the anyway. So it also talks about existing and permitted noises, so those rural activities.
And then my next one, we talk about noise insulation on P4. We talk state highway. We can obviously talk to Kiwi Rail about their plans to increase the number of movements on the rail line, and just interested why we not put some form of rules around rails, given that the objective of the district is to consolidate living in the towns within a kilometre, isn't it? Salty, I think the area is try and increase residential within a kilometre of train stations.
Under the Wellington Regional Strategy.
Yeah, so we are going to see that occurring, and yet, you know, I live 12, 13 kilometres from Featherston and I can hear the trains. So I just want, you know, if the cloud is low, I hear them very clearly.
We will get to the Kiwi Rail. It is, there's no evidence has been provided at this stage, in my mind, that those provisions are warranted from a cost perspective. And Kiwi Rail has that opportunity to provide the evidence, and it hasn't been to that isn't in there. And in terms of why it is for the state highway, from what I understand in the previous consultation on the plan, NZTA did provide that evidence, which was included.
Yeah, what we're saying here, if I read this right, that trains are not subject to any rules.
Maybe we can cover that off when we get to the Kiwi Rail.
Yeah, just
part of it, yeah.
The current overlay for,
and then the last part on noise that I had, when we talked about helicopters and things, the increased use of drones, there's no mention in here of drones. And we know that drones are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the noise of them is something that definitely needs to be looked at as well. Helicopters are one type of noise frequency, drones are another one. And we're already seeing more use of those in the agricultural environment now.
that's something I'd have to come back on in the right of pie. I don't believe it has been considered on the plan yet.
And there wouldn't be any scope, would there?
Don't know how it has been elsewhere in plans.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hang on.
I don't know whether it's scope for it or not.
So yeah, within looking into that, it's whether there's scope or not, because
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the question.
Yeah.
The consolidated bylaws.
that's true. Yeah,
Might be the answer.
yeah.
I've got a couple of policy questions still. Just one arising from the answer you gave to Commissioner Plummer about function and operating of existing and permitted noise generating activities. You said that there's a rule framework that allows them to continue, particularly in the rural context.
So there's, I was saying there's the, at the start of the rules, there's the box of that are not subject to these rules.
Right. Okay. Right.
So, and that includes D, agriculture, horticulture, pastoral farming,
Okay.
and the general, all those activities in the general rural and rural life.
Okay. That's good. Sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. I hadn't noticed that. I wonder, just looking at that and in terms of the drone question, whether drones are defined as aircraft.
I think, yeah,
I might be able to.
Yes, so
I think a similar question was raised in the rural topic, and yes, it is. It is defined as aircraft, so the agricultural aviation rules would apply to drones as well as helicopters and other aircraft that will.
But it's not the flight component, it's the landing.
That's right.
That where the control, and we'll get onto that. The second question I had, Katie, was policy E8. And this comes back, I think you possibly answered that. It's only certain rural activities that are controlled. Obviously, clause D of the rule table clarifies that, along with the rules that relate to frost fans, etc. Okay. Okay, I'll leave it there. There's some questions on rules that'll come through when you get to that point.
So in terms of, there is the rule box which outlines that are excluded from the rules and the standards. I think we have mentioned it, but aircraft operated during flight are excluded from these. Can go through them really quickly. Vehicles on the road, being driven on the road, trains running on the lines. And then there's the kind of exclusions. Photocraft operating on the surface of water bodies, any warning devices or emergency sirens.
We've witnessed that on a few occasions here.
the use of generators and mobile equipment, again for emergency purposes. Activities at emergency service facilities, helicopters used for emergencies, impulsive sounds, and then control of crowd noise at parks and reserves.
Yes, I've got two questions arising. Keep them short. Under G, I don't know if this is something that happens in the district, but in some of the larger metropolitan ones, some businesses do load shedding, and where they use generators to control the load during sort of certain hours of the day. Do you think that would be covered by G, or is that excluded by G?
So that would not, because what emergency purposes.
Okay. So they'd be subject to the normal zone rules. Okay. And under K, what about that would be a council reserve or a park where there's a market or a concert or something, presumably.
I might need to check, but I would have thought that's just your general noise at a park. If there was
So it's just crowd noise.
event, that would be a
Because that would come under
temporary.
activities, wouldn't it?
So any amplified noise would be subject to the rules. Yeah.
That's anywhere. Right, we're at a winery, so.
Yes.
What's the definition of a crowd? More than two?
Is there a definition of a crowd?
I know that's being very.
It's exempt anyway. It's exempt anyway.
Mm.
Well, it was.
Yeah. Okay, moving on.
Read the crowd.
Have you any other questions, gentlemen?
We get that on the record. Three's a crowd.
And so moving on to the rules. So rule 1 covers any noise, any other noise that's not provided for in the chapter.
Yeah. So that's the default.
Yeah, default cover all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it has to comply with all of the standards.
Is there potentially some unintended consequences of that? Have you? I guess it's very there's a permissive approach because if you're not listed as an activity, then you can take benefit from rule 1.
Yeah.
If you're not controlled, you're permitted. And if you're controlled, you default to another activity status if you don't meet the standards, presumably.
Yeah, if you don't meet the standards, then you have to restrict discretionary.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So rule 2 is on construction, maintenance and activities. Again, if you don't meet the relevant standards, standard 2, then you restrict discretionary.
And presumably that's the construction noise standard
That's
802. 3.
and then rule 3 is on dust emissions, and then there is a standard again in standard 2 on it is 4 in standard 2.
On page 21.
Yeah. Right. And then rule 4 is noise from steering devices. And there's a standard in standard 2 around those devices. And rule 5 is cross protection devices, and again in step 2, there are rules. Those. And then there's wind turbines. I guess compliance with the relevant language. And then there's noise from large scale renewable electricity. And compliance with the New Zealand standard. Rule 8 from helicopter landing areas. And there's specific rules for the Chester Road.
Can I just ask you a question about that? We go to page 23. Under the operator shall ensure that the activity be limited to use for Hughes 500 model or such other models of helicopter. Models applies to a certain type of helicopter. So this rule here, currently the way it's worded, is restricting them to a Hughes 500 helicopter. Models needs to be type.
Yeah.
Just a real
Good point.
Thanks, Craig.
So rule 10 is temporary activities. It's temporary activities, excluding those military temporary activities. And then rule 11 is like free training activities. And then there's 12 is around changes, new buildings, changes to existing additions, occupied by a noise sensitive activity in the commercial, mixed use or general industrial zones.
This is a new concept, isn't it, in the plan?
And then rule 13 is around those, again, the new buildings, additions to existing buildings to be occupied by noise activities, the state highway noise control boundary, which was what NZTA said.
There's standard on that, or is it all contained within the rule 13?
It is compliance with 3. And then there is an overlay, and that's what sets out the noise control boundary area.
Okay. We're going to need an explanation of how RS3 will operate in practice, but that may require students' input too. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to leave it to when we get to the state highway matter? Leave it then? Yep.
And then it's in context.
So rule 14 is noise sensitive activities within Hood Airdrome. 15 was noise sensitive activities within Chester Road, the noise boundary. And so those are the rules.
Any questions from?
And then there are the
Standards.
four standards, sorry. Standard 1 is noise. And then standard 2 figures for those specific activities. And standard 3 is the noise insulation. That's for those noise sensitive activities. So the state highway and the noise sensitive activities in the commercial industrial mixed use zones. And then standard 4 is those noise insulation standards for those specific Chester Road and Airdrome.
Chester and Hood.
Yes.
Yep. Just to complete it, can you just tell us about the key terms and definitions that underpin these.
There is definition for noise sensitive activity. I think that's the main one that comes to my head.
And you'll get onto that
Yeah.
later.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
So we'll start on paragraph 10 for aviation. The Mitchell supports the recommendations to retain or amend provisions to include agricultural aviation activities or conservation activities. However, Mr. Mitchell considers that the following should be included in the noise exceptions. Conservation activities undertaken for a limited duration, including agricultural aviation activities and helicopter landing areas in the natural open space zone. As stated in the Section 42 report, conservation activities are already excluded under D in the general rural and rural lifestyle zone. Based on the advice from Mr. Ardern, I consider that these activities should also be exempt in the natural open space zone and therefore recommend that the plan is amended. Mr. Mitchell has also sought an alternative to the noise exemptions to amend the introduction. I note that the submitter did not provide a submission or further submission on the introduction and therefore consider that there is no scope to make these changes.
Any questions? Yeah.
Not surprisingly, I do have a question. What's the rule that would capture conservation activities? And the noise, or isn't there a rule?
We'll cover those activities in the natural open space zone.
Yeah, sorry, badly question. Is there a rule? But forgetting about the zone itself,
Yeah.
is there a rule in what's the chapter for noise? What number is it? Is there a rule in the proposed noise chapter that would otherwise capture noise from conservation activities? And particularly is it the aviation rule?
They would be covered by the helicopter landing area rule if they were undertaken.
Okay.
In helicopter landing areas.
So what rule is that?
Rule 8. That will be if those activities were landing and taken off from those helicopter landing areas.
Well, I just wonder about that because the noise chapter is a district-wide rule.
Yeah.
Applies to all zones. The zone chapter applies to the activities in those zones. Just because a conservation activity is excluded in the general rural and rural lifestyle zones, and if we run with your exemption, the natural open space zone, won't there still be a requirement for that activity to comply with the district-wide rules and the helicopter landing rules?
Well, the exclusion excludes the helicopter.
Okay, well, I understand that. So,
yeah.
So the exclusion in the rural zone specifically excludes helicopter noise being complied with under clause D, does it? We don't have that zone in front of us.
The rule exclusion in D already excludes agriculture, aviation, helicopter landing areas, machinery.
Okay.
So it's extending it to those natural space zones as well.
Okay. When you write a reply, can you provide a copy of that rule from the general rural and rural lifestyle zones that you are talking about?
Oh, I'm talking about the exclusion in the noise chapter.
Okay, so that's not clear to me from reading that. You said under D in the general rural and rural lifestyle zones. So what rule should I go to in the proposed plan in the noise chapter?
it would be covered by this rule if it wasn't.
But what's the rule number, Katie?
Oh, rule 8.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so where's clause D?
And that's no, I'm saying in the rule exceptions at the beginning of
That's chapter.
D.
Yeah.
Is that, sorry, I might not understand your question.
The way I read your paragraph 11, it sounded like the exclusion was in the zone, not in the noise chapter.
Okay, the exclusion is in the noise chapter.
I've added it here.
Yeah.
So that, so that's number, that's 11 in the rule box. I mean, not, sorry, not 11, L.
Yeah.
You've added it as L in the,
Added it as L, yes.
as L in the rule box.
L.
So it's then been
Page
added,
5.
here you go. David. And added here under the rules, the following activities are not subject to the rules and standard in this chapter.
Okay.
That there.
Thank you for that. It was late at night when I read that last night and I just couldn't understand. So as I said, I thought it talked about.
I see how you've read that now. Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay. In terms of paragraph 12, what's the harm in actually as a consequential change updating the
It was provided as in the evidence. It was, if you like, it was kind of an and or include what I've now read as L, or you could include the introduction.
If you ever think about it as an and in your right of reply. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Would you like to hear from Mr. Arden on that matter as well in terms of what he said?
Do you want me to just read my statement? So Ms. Michelle, on behalf of NZ, is requesting an exemption for the use of aviation activities, for the purpose of conservation activities in the natural open space zone. Specifically, the following amendment, and that's the conservation activities undertaken for a limited duration, including agricultural aviation activities and helicopter landing areas in the natural open space zone. So that's his exemption request. So my response is that I am supportive of aviation activities being included as an exemption in the natural open space zone for conservation activities, noting that the activities would be infrequent and the natural open space zone are areas of low population density. And my recommendation was that I have no objections to including the exemption.
Any further questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Paragraph 13.
So the New Zealand Helicopter Association considers that the PDP should be able to provide for infrequent temporary commercial helicopter activities. Ms. Ford considers that noise R8 should be amended to provide for temporary commercial helicopter activity permitted activity. So the rule sheet includes an activity where movements for temporary commercial helicopter activities from or to a site are on no more than 3 days, either consecutively or non-consecutively over 3 months. Movements are only undertaken between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. and the site is not within residential zones, commercial and mixed use or commercial mixed use zones. And there's a note for the purpose of just 4 days counted where there is at least, although there is no limit on the number of movements that may be undertaken during a day. And Ms. Wharf, so paragraph 14, Ms. Wharf also considers that a definition is required for temporary commercial helicopter activities, which is as follows. Temporary commercial helicopter activities are intermittent activities, asset management, disaster relief work, flight training, science and research, surveillance, survey operations, transportation people. So noise R8 only applies to areas, i.e. facilities intended or designed for helicopters, and does not apply to the occasional landing of helicopters in a paddock or other site not designed or intended for helicopters. I agree with the evidence of this idea. Proposed amendment does not provide controls on the number of movements, say, type of aircraft, and the number of aircraft. There's also no control on proximity to noise-sensitive activities. Therefore, the adverse effects may not be effectively avoided or mitigated. I consider that these types of helicopter movements should be subject to resource consent process.
Questions of Katie, or should we hear from Mr. Arden? Yep.
I'll just read my evidence again. So Ms. Wolf considered that the DEP should provide for temporary and infrequent helicopter operation activity status restrictions. That a definition for temporary helicopter activities is included. I won't repeat the rules there.
Yeah.
Request this matter. So in my response, I know that some of these activities may already be allowable under the PDP, and so I'll refer to Mrs. Tusa for that. The restrictions are more stringent than were previously thought, with only 3 days in a 3-month period, and also outside of the zones which are typically more densely populated. I'm of the view that the proposed rule sought could still be fairly permissive in terms of the potential noise effects. If the permitted activity rule was included, additional requirements on either setback distances from residential dwellings or number of movements in any one day, or a combination of the two should be considered. The sought definition for proposed for temporary commercial helicopter activities is fairly broad. For example, flight training or infrequent transportation of people may not necessarily meet the policies of the plan. And it would be beneficial to understand which of these activities cannot be exclusively carried out from a commercial helicopter landing area. So my recommendations, initially I refer to Ms. Sousa on if these activities are already allowed or in the PDP. As thought, I do not recommend the adoption of the permitted activity rule without further limitations on the use in the form of setback distances or number of movements or both of these. And I do not recommend the inclusion of the temporary commercial helicopter activities definition without further justification on why the proposed activities cannot be carried out using commercial helicopter landing area.
Thank you. Questions?
I did, but it's been covered. Happy.
You're happy? You happy?
I am happy.
Great.
Thanks, Mr. Arden. Just initially to question to Katie. Mr. Arden has said that some of these activities are already permitted anyway. In terms of the definition that Ms. Wolf has thought, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 activities that are listed. Certainly in your right of reply, if you could indicate which of those would, but just while you're here, are there any that stand out that you can give us an answer on now?
I think I'd like to go into them more, but some of it may be some of the activities may be those agricultural activities. And so those ones might be. It's whether they fit within that or not. I'd like to check those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just conscious that there are 2 parts to the submission. There's the definition, and there's the controls on days and hours, and there's exemptions to certain zones, etc. So,
So just look further on that. I'm sort of struggling to understand why they're asking for this when they're excluding residential, commercial and mixed use zones anyway. So they're talking rural zones and open space zones anyway, which there doesn't seem to be any rules about helicopter operations within that environment that would limit them doing this to begin with. Is there, or am I missing something?
Rule 8 is helicopter landing areas. I think they're talking about areas that are not
It's, yeah, those areas that are not.
areas outside of specifically identified landing areas is what they're referring to.
So
In their submission.
can you just then confirm to me that rule 8 is anywhere a helicopter lands,
There is a specific.
or are they
It's
specified
a specific
landing areas?
landing area. There is a,
The nature of a helicopter is it can land anywhere.
Mm.
So,
for those that, would go to the definition.
Yes. We don't have those definitions in place.
Yeah.
We do page 30. 31, is it? No, that's only where there's changes.
Yeah, that's only where
Yeah.
there's.
Um,
Up for you. A helicopter landing area means any area of land intended or designed to be used, whether wholly or partly, for helicopter movement or servicing, including heliports and helipads.
Okay, so that excludes, I've been in helicopters most of my professional life, and we've landed in places that you think you could land a helicopter. So that doesn't include those areas. So largely what they're talking here would be approved anyway, wouldn't it? Because it's excluding the residential and commercial areas. So we're talking more open space areas and rural.
That is how I initially read the rule, and I would maybe hear from
I think that's why it's been useful to,
as to how they would see it would apply.
I think it's useful to understand the rule and how it mechanically operates before we hear the submissions. So
It'd be nice to know why they consider that they can't do what they're doing as well. Then why are we missing something that perhaps they've seen that I'm not quite understanding what their concerns are. Yeah.
there's a number of provisions in play here. There's the rule box.
Yeah.
There's rule 1, there's rule 8, and then there's the definition. Let's just start with the definition. Can you just read that definition again for helicopter landing areas?
Means any area of land or intended or designed to be used, whether wholly or partly, for helicopter movement or servicing, including heliports and helipads.
So to me, the word intended doesn't necessarily, it's not designated, it's intended. So I'm just thinking,
That
Yeah.
definition is problematic,
yeah.
open to discretion.
Mm.
And if the rule 8 is relying on that, I think it's potentially problematic. And we'll take that up with Ms. Wharf. I understand what the intention is.
Yeah.
I just don't know that the rule is the definition is delivering it. And the rules depend on, rule 8 depends on that definition. I could see this going to a declaration in the court as to what intended means, intended on the day.
Yeah.
Or intended in perpetuity, or
And flexibility of a helicopter
yeah,
makes it problematic as well.
there's a case to be made that a landing in a farm paddock that happens frequently could be captured by that rule. I recognise, Katie, that that's not the intention, but that's a potential outcome of that definition. I just wondered if you could have a look at that, and you would need to hear what we have to say, what Ms. Wolf has to say on that. But is one possible way of dealing with this is to make it clear in the rule box?
Yeah.
Is there anything? Rule D might cover it already. That talks about helicopter landing areas for agricultural activity. Yes. So,
It talked about agriculture aviation,
yes,
which
But-
would also be a helicopter as well as a fixed wing.
It also talks about activities undertaken for a limited duration, so that covers off a wide spectrum. So that's where I was quite happy with the box and how.
Yeah.
yeah. The issue for me is the term limited duration. Is that defined in any way? I'm just conscious that,
3 days.
there can be quite a bit of litigation on these sort of things. A rural property suddenly has a increased frequency of landings. Council receives a complaint from an adjoining neighbour. The farming operator said, well, this is just a limited duration. It's not an official landing area, even though it's been happening, 5 times a week for 5 months, whatever. So whilst D is a potential assistance along with the definition, it's got some aspects of discretion in it also.
Yeah.
Now, whether there's scope to deal with these matters, I don't know, perhaps Ms Wolf's evidence might assist there. And then we've got Rule 1, which basically supports the rule box approach, that if you're not captured by the definition and you're not captured by Rule 8, which is just landing areas, then you're a permitted activity, subject to complying with those standards.
With the 4
obviously.
standards, yeah.
So I'm not trying to create problems for the council, but I can just see how permitted activity rules have to have certainty. And there's just, in the definition and in the rule box, there's some elements of discretion that perhaps don't give the certainty that might be needed in light of an issue arising.
Do you capture all of that, Charles?
We'll go through that.
It's out of interest, how, from the council staff that are present, what, has this been an issue in the district, or are there any situations where this is
The landings.
in rural zones?
Much, mainly other, cross fans.
Yes.
But
Okay.
Can I, thanks.
It's
I think we've had some fixed wing aircraft inquiries,
Okay.
particularly with the solar farm that's going through the system. There's been some questions raised between the parties over that.
Sure.
Helicopters, as an example.
So your main area of concern here is Whanaka Health, what's going in and out of there. Got to remember there's only 2 real operators of helicopters in the Wairarapa, one out of Chester Road. There is a small operator out here. Taurua come down every now and then. So a lot of, I look at these rules as a possibly a more pertinent to, or what's been requested, to areas where there is a helicopter operation for ferrying people, where they're coming in and out. So there is some clarification needed, but I myself am reasonably comfortable with where this is heading.
And you mentioned Whanakaho, but that is helicopter landing area. It's identified as.
That's where you're getting large movements in and out all the time.
Anything unclear in that line of questioning?
Not even.
Comfortable with?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got that.
Fantastic.
On to
Thank you, yes.
so paragraph 17, Mrs. Heatherwaite, Miss Linton Hancock and Dr. Charles for the inclusion of rail noise controls and a vibration alert.
Sorry, Katie, I do recognise that we are due to break at 10 and we're 1 minute away. Did everyone just want a 15-minute coffee break?
It's a very good.
And then, because I think Kiwi Rail will potentially take some time. So if we will adjourn now and come back at 10:15.
Yeah, for the onslaught.